I'm Dr. Michael Harrison, and I've been a neurologist at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland for 16 years. During my career, I've seen everything you can imagine in neurology: strokes, brain tumors, seizure disorders, traumatic injuries, and every kind of damage the human brain can endure. But what I'm about to tell you about is the one case that made me question everything I thought I knew about consciousness, identity, and the very nature of human existence itself. Johns Hopkins is one of the most prestigious medical institutions in the world, with a neurology department that handles some of the most complex brain cases on the East Coast. During my time here, I've consulted on hundreds of cases involving personality changes, dissociative disorders, and unexplained neurological phenomena. I thought I had seen it all. I was wrong. The case that changed everything began on the evening of October 15th, 2023. I was finishing up my rounds in the Sheikh Zayed Tower when my pager buzzed at 11:47 p.m. The message was from Dr. Angela Park, our emergency department attending. Urgent psych consult needed, room 12, possible dissociative episode, patient requesting neurologist specifically. I made my way quickly to the emergency department, where I found Dr. Park waiting with a concerned expression I had rarely seen in her 15 years of emergency medicine. "Michael, I need you to see this patient," she said, walking me toward room 12. "Her husband brought her in about an hour ago. Says she had some kind of complete personality change this evening, but this isn't like anything I've seen before." The patient was Nicole Christine Barnes, a 29-year-old elementary school teacher from Annapolis. According to her husband, David, Nicole had been completely normal when she came home from work that afternoon. They had dinner together, watched some television, and went to bed around 10 p.m. But sometime during the night, David was awakened by his wife speaking in what he described as strange, old-fashioned English. She was sitting up in bed talking to someone who wasn't there, David explained, his voice shaking with confusion and fear. But it wasn't Nicole. The way she was speaking, the words she was using, it was like she was from a different time period. When I tried to talk to her, she looked at me like she had never seen me before in her life. David had attempted to calm Nicole down, but she became increasingly agitated, speaking in what he could only describe as medieval language. She seemed confused by their bedroom, by the electric lights, by everything around her. That's when he decided to bring her to Johns Hopkins. When I entered room 12, I encountered a scene that challenged everything I understood about neurological presentation. Nicole was sitting upright on the examination table, but her posture was completely different from what I would expect from a modern American woman. She sat with her back perfectly straight, her hands folded in her lap in a way that seemed almost ceremonial. Her expression was serene but distant, as if she were looking at something beyond the confines of the emergency room. "Good evening," I said, approaching her bedside. "I'm Dr. Harrison. I understand you've been having some difficulties tonight." Nicole looked at me with eyes that seemed both familiar and utterly foreign. When she spoke, her voice carried an accent I couldn't immediately place, and her words were structured in a way that sounded like English, but not any English I had heard before. "Prithee, good sir, wherefore doth thou hold me in this strange keep?" she said, her voice soft but clear. "I know not this place of white walls and burning light without flame. Art thou a learned man of physic?" I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't the confused rambling of a psychiatric patient or the disorganized speech of someone experiencing a psychotic break. Her words were perfectly coherent, grammatically correct, but structured in a way that belonged to another century entirely. "Can you tell me your name?" I asked, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "I am Sister Elizabeth of the Order of Saint Benedict," she replied without hesitation. "I have served our Lord in the convent of St. Margaret these 7 years past, but I know not how I have come to be in this peculiar chamber." I spent the next hour conducting what would become the most extraordinary neurological examination of my career. Nicole, or whoever she believed herself to be, answered my questions with perfect consistency, but everything about her responses suggested that she genuinely believed she was a medieval Benedictine nun. She referred to the hospital as a monastery, called the nurses sisters, and seemed genuinely confused by modern medical equipment. When I used my penlight to check her pupils, she flinched away and made the sign of the cross, muttering what sounded like Latin prayers. But it wasn't just her speech patterns that had changed. Nicole's entire physical presence was different. She moved with a deliberate, measured grace that suggested years of monastic training. Her facial expressions were controlled and contemplative. Even the way she held her hands seemed to reflect a lifetime of prayer and religious devotion. Most remarkably, she seemed to have complete fluency in what I later learned was Middle English, the form of English spoken in England during the 14th century. She also spoke Latin with what appeared to be perfect pronunciation and grammar, reciting prayers and biblical passages with an ease that suggested deep familiarity. Dr. Park and I ran a complete battery of neurological tests, CT scans, MRI, EEG, comprehensive blood work. Everything came back completely normal. Nicole's brain showed no signs of trauma, tumor, infection, or any other pathology that could explain her condition. Over the next few days, I began exploring every possible medical explanation for Nicole's condition. The first and most obvious possibility was dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. However, several factors made this diagnosis problematic. I consulted with Dr. Helen Crawford, one of the country's leading experts on dissociative disorders from McLean Hospital in Massachusetts. After a comprehensive evaluation, Dr. Crawford noted several aspects of Nicole's case that didn't fit the typical DID profile. In classic dissociative identity disorder, alternate personalities typically emerge gradually over time as a response to childhood trauma, Dr. Crawford explained. The alters usually have different ages, backgrounds, and personalities, but they share the same basic language and cultural knowledge as the host. What you're describing, a complete linguistic and cultural transformation, is unprecedented in the literature. Extensive interviews with Nicole's family, friends, and colleagues revealed no history of trauma that might trigger such a severe dissociative episode. Her childhood had been remarkably stable. Her parents, Maria and Robert Barnes, had been married for 35 years. Nicole had excelled in school, maintained long-term friendships, and showed no signs of psychological distress. We also investigated the possibility of cryptomnesia, unconsciously absorbed memories that emerge during altered states of consciousness. I worked with a team of researchers to trace every possible source of medieval knowledge Nicole might have encountered. Her browsing history, library records, Netflix viewing habits, and even her social media feeds were thoroughly analyzed. We interviewed her college professors, examined her course transcripts, and spoke with everyone who might have exposed her to medieval culture or language. The investigation revealed that Nicole had taken a single introductory history course that covered medieval Europe, but the syllabus showed it focused on political events rather than religious life or linguistic details. Dr. Daniela Alvarez, a forensic psychologist specializing in memory reconstruction, conducted a series of hypnotic regression sessions to see if Nicole had unconsciously absorbed medieval knowledge from some forgotten source. Under hypnosis, Nicole recalled her normal life experiences, but showed no hidden knowledge of medieval history or Latin. It's as if the information simply doesn't exist in her long-term memory, Dr. Alvarez told me after the sessions. In cases of cryptomnesia, we can usually trace the source of recalled information, even if the patient doesn't consciously remember encountering it. Here, there's no source to trace. By the third day, word of Nicole's case had spread throughout the hospital. I consulted with Dr. Patricia Wong, a medieval linguistics specialist from Georgetown University, who drove down to Baltimore specifically to evaluate Nicole's language use. Dr. Wong spent hours with Nicole, conducting what she later described as the most authentic Middle English conversation I've ever experienced outside of academic research. But even she noted some curious inconsistencies. Her use of Middle English is remarkably fluent, But there are subtle anachronisms, Dr. Wong explained. She occasionally uses a construction that's slightly later than the period she claims to be from. It's as if she's speaking the language as it existed in transition between dialects and time periods. This actually makes it more interesting, not less. It suggests this isn't simply memorized text, but active, living language use. Professor James MacDonald from Yale University's Medieval Studies Department arrived on the fourth day. His evaluation was equally puzzling. She describes monastic life with extraordinary detail, but she makes small errors that are fascinating, he told me. She correctly describes the 8 canonical hours of prayer, but she places lauds slightly later than it would typically occur. She knows the feast days of obscure saints, but she refers to one celebration that historians believe may have been specific to a particular region of Yorkshire. These minor inconsistencies actually strengthened rather than weakened the case. If Nicole were fabricating her medieval persona, the errors suggested either incredibly sophisticated knowledge or genuine confusion rather than perfect memorization. On the 5th day, Nicole began experiencing what appeared to be episodes of unconscious writing. Night nurses reported finding her sitting up in bed, writing with her eyes closed. The writing itself was in a medieval script style, but the content was often fragmentary and unclear. Dr. Caroline Briggs, our sleep specialist, conducted overnight EEG monitoring during these episodes. The results were deeply unsettling. Her brain wave patterns during these writing episodes are unlike anything I've seen, Dr. Briggs reported. She's not in REM sleep, she's not in a typical hypnagogic state, and she's not experiencing any form of seizure activity. Her brain patterns suggest she's conscious and focused, but her eyes remain closed and she shows no response to external stimuli. The writing produced during these episodes was often difficult to decipher, but fragments included what appeared to be inventory lists for a monastery, notes about herb gardens, and repeated references to the great mortality that was coming from the eastern lands. One particularly disturbing entry, written on the night of October 19th, read, "The bells toll for Sister Margaret this day. The Black Death takes another of our sisterhood. I fear we shall all be gathered to God ere winter's end." Historical research revealed that an outbreak of what was likely bubonic plague had indeed reached Yorkshire in the autumn of 1348, killing most of the inhabitants of several monasteries in the region. By this point, I had assembled what amounted to a small research team. Historians, linguists, neurologists, psychiatrists, and even genealogical researchers were all trying to make sense of Nicole's condition. The sheer amount of accurate historical detail she provided seemed to rule out coincidence or general knowledge. But it was the architectural drawings that provided the most compelling evidence. Beginning on the 6th day, Nicole started sketching detailed floor plans of what she described as our blessed convent of St. Margaret. These weren't simple sketches. They were precise architectural drawings showing a complex monastic facility with multiple buildings, gardens, workshops, and religious spaces. Dr. Margaret Thornton from the Smithsonian Institution analyzed these drawings and made a discovery that left our entire team speechless. These plans match historical records of St. Margaret's Convent in Yorkshire with remarkable accuracy, Dr. Thornton reported. We have partial records of this monastery from tax documents and legal proceedings, but nothing as detailed as these drawings. The layout she's described includes features that we know existed, but that aren't documented in any surviving plans. Further investigation revealed that St. Margaret's Convent had been destroyed by plague in 1349, with most of its inhabitants dying during the winter of 1348 to 1349. Records were sparse, but they did mention a Sister Elizabeth among the victims. Meanwhile, Nicole's neurological status remained completely normal. Her brain scans showed no abnormalities, her reflexes were appropriate, and her cognitive function, when she was being Nicole rather than Sister Elizabeth, was entirely intact. Dr. Victor Hahn, a psychiatrist specializing in rare psychological phenomena, spent several days observing Nicole. His assessment was troubling. "This isn't any form of psychosis I've encountered," he told me. "Her thought processes are completely organized and logical within the context of her assumed identity. She shows none of the disorganization, paranoia, or reality distortion we typically see in psychiatric conditions. If I didn't know her true identity, I would assess her as a mentally healthy medieval nun who was somehow displaced in time." On October 20th, something changed in Nicole's behavior. She became increasingly agitated, speaking often about the need to return to prayers and expressing confusion about why she couldn't hear the monastery bells. She repeatedly asked about her sisters and seemed distressed by their absence. That evening, our EEG monitoring picked up unusual brainwave patterns, unlike anything Dr. Briggs had seen before. At 11:43 p.m., the patterns suddenly normalized, and Nicole opened her eyes for the first time in hours. "Dr. Harrison?" she said in her normal voice, with her normal American accent. "What am I doing here? David said I've been in the hospital, but I don't remember anything." Nicole had returned to herself, but the transition wasn't as clean as I initially thought. Over the following days, as we prepared for her discharge, she began reporting strange dreams and occasional moments of confusion. "Sometimes I smell things that aren't there," she told me during our final consultation. "Incense and herbs and something like wood smoke. And I've been having these dreams where I'm praying in Latin, but I don't remember any Latin from high school." More disturbing were the reports from her husband, David. Nicole occasionally talked in her sleep, and he recorded several instances of her speaking what sounded like Middle English. When we played these recordings for Dr. Wong, she confirmed that Nicole was indeed speaking coherent Middle English, though the content was fragmentary. I ran additional tests, including comprehensive psychological evaluations and extended neurological monitoring, but everything continued to come back normal. Nicole showed no signs of ongoing dissociation, no memory of her time as Sister Elizabeth, and no conscious knowledge of medieval history or Latin. But there were subtle changes. Nicole's handwriting had shifted slightly, incorporating more elaborate letter forms. She began requesting books about medieval history, claiming they felt familiar, though she couldn't explain why. Most significantly, she had developed an inexplicable fear of winter months and repeatedly expressed anxiety about sickness coming from far away. The historical research team made one final discovery that chilled me to the bone. Sister Elizabeth of St. Margaret's Convent had died on October 22, 1348, according to the monastery's surviving records. Nicole had returned to her normal consciousness on October 20th, 2023. Not the exact anniversary, but close enough to feel more than coincidental. 3 weeks after Nicole's discharge, I received a call from David Barnes. Nicole had been experiencing what he described as episodes, brief moments where she would stop what she was doing and begin writing in an archaic script. The writing was always the same phrase: Requiem aeternam dona eis, Domine. Grant them eternal rest, O Lord. When David showed her these writings, Nicole insisted she had no memory of creating them and couldn't translate the Latin. But she became visibly distressed when she saw them, often crying without understanding why. I prescribed mild anxiolytics to help with Nicole's anxiety, but I remained deeply troubled by the case. Follow-up appointments over the next several months showed that Nicole was functioning normally in her daily life, but the occasional episodes of unconscious writing continued. 6 months later, Nicole called me directly. "Dr. Harrison, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice unusually serious. "I've been doing research on my own, reading about medieval monasteries and the plague years. I don't know why, but I feel like I'm looking for something specific. And last night, I dreamed about a place I've never been. Stone walls, gardens with herbs I could smell and name, and women in religious habits who felt like family." Nicole paused, and I could hear her breathing heavily. I think something happened to me that week in the hospital, something that changed me in ways I don't understand. I'm still myself, but it's like there's someone else's memories trying to surface. Is that possible, Dr. Harrison? Can someone else's experiences somehow become part of your mind? I didn't have an answer for her then, and I don't have one now. The case of Nicole Barnes remains the most puzzling and disturbing case of my career. The medical literature contains no comparable examples of such detailed, historically accurate, alternate personality manifestation combined with genuine linguistic fluency in archaic languages. I've consulted with colleagues around the world, reviewed cases of dissociative disorders, studied phenomena like cryptomnesia and false memory syndrome, and explored every possible neurological explanation for Nicole's condition. None of them adequately account for what I witnessed. The most rational explanation remains that Nicole experienced an extremely complex dissociative episode, possibly triggered by stress or psychological factors we failed to identify. Perhaps her mind constructed an elaborate alternate identity using fragments of information she had unconsciously absorbed throughout her life. But this explanation struggles with several facts: the historical accuracy of obscure details, the fluency in Middle English that would require years of study to achieve, the architectural knowledge of a specific monastery that was destroyed 7 centuries ago, and the ongoing symptoms that suggest some lasting change in Nicole's consciousness. More troubling is the possibility that consciousness itself is more complex and permeable than modern neuroscience assumes. If memories, experiences, and even personality traits can somehow persist beyond individual death and occasionally surface in other minds, then Nicole's case might represent a phenomenon that challenges our fundamental understanding of human consciousness. I've never shared the full details of this case in any medical journal. The evidence, while compelling to me, lacks the reproducibility and controlled conditions that scientific publication requires. But I've documented everything thoroughly, and I continue to follow Nicole's progress. Nicole Barnes returned to her normal life, married David the following year, and continues teaching elementary school. But according to our ongoing communications, she still experiences occasional dreams in Latin, still feels inexplicably drawn to medieval history, and still sometimes wakes up to find pages of writing in an archaic script that she doesn't remember creating. The case has fundamentally changed how I approach neurology and consciousness. I'm more humble now about the limitations of medical knowledge, more open to phenomena that don't fit established categories, and more willing to acknowledge when I simply don't have answers. Sometimes I wonder if Sister Elizabeth of St. Margaret's Convent, who died of plague 7 centuries ago, somehow found a way to briefly inhabit the mind of a modern American teacher. Perhaps consciousness is more persistent and transferable than we understand. Perhaps the boundaries between individual minds, between past and present, between life and death, are more permeable than our science suggests. Or perhaps Nicole's mind created an extraordinarily elaborate alternate identity that drew upon information sources we haven't been able to identify. Perhaps human consciousness has depths and capabilities that we're only beginning to understand. I may never know the truth about what happened to Nicole Barnes during those 6 days in October, but I will never forget watching a modern woman become someone else entirely, speaking in the voice of a medieval nun, carrying memories of a life lived 7 centuries ago. It remains the most unexplained and humbling experience of my medical career, a reminder that human consciousness contains mysteries that may forever remain beyond our understanding. The most important lesson from Nicole's case may be the recognition that consciousness, identity, and memory are far more complex than we assume. Whether her experience represents some form of paranormal phenomenon or reveals unknown capabilities of the human mind, it challenges us to remain open to possibilities that exist beyond the current boundaries of medical science. Whatever happened to Nicole Barnes, it was real, it was documented, and it defied explanation. And sometimes, in the quiet moments of my practice, I still wonder about Sister Elizabeth, and whether somewhere in the depths of human consciousness, the past continues to live. waiting for the right circumstances to briefly surface in our modern world.